Hey scholars, so we're going to be reading a new book today, and it is called Planting the Trees of Kenya. Planting the Trees of Kenya, the story of Wangari Maathai by Claire A. Nivola. A few interesting facts is that Kenya is actually in the continent of Africa, and it is where Mr. Coyle used to live before he moved here to Taiwan with us. So we've been talking about global warming, climate change, and how it's a big problem, right? So we're burning too much gas or fossil fuels, and that's putting pollution in the air. We're cutting down too many trees so that there's not enough oxygen in the air and too much carbon dioxide, which also isn't good to breathe. So there's just polar ice caps are melting, so there's just a lot of problems that are happening. And yesterday we read a book about an activist called Greta Thunberg, who was a young girl, and she inspired a lot of people to really start fighting back when it comes to climate change and global warming. So this book, though, Planting the Trees of Kenya, the story of Wangari Maathai, is about a different person from a different place who is also trying to deal with the issue of global warming and climate change in a different way. In our global warming book, we talked about deforestation. Okay, so I can see like if she's planting the trees, that probably means that she's not doing deforestation. That probably means maybe she's trying to solve the problem. Okay, so we're going to look at how she is trying to help end or slow down climate change and global warming in her own way. So this is Planting the Trees of Kenya, the story of Wangari Maathai. As Wangari Maathai tells it, when she was growing up on a farm in the hills of central Kenya, the earth was clothed in its dress of green. So there she is, she's a little girl. The earth was clothed in its dress of green. So clearly the earth does not have clothes, right? But she's saying to her, when she was little, it looked like the earth was so green, right? It looked like it's so green, it's even wearing a green dress. Fig trees, olive trees, crotons, and flame trees covered the land, and fish filled the pure waters of the streams. So they have so many green fields, so many plants. Somebody has a garden here. It looks very beautiful. And there Wangari is looking up at the tree. This is a fig tree. You can see the little purple fruits. Those are figs. The fig tree was sacred then, and Wangari knew not to disturb it, not even to carry its fallen branches home for firewood. In the stream near her homestead, where she went to collect water for her mother, she played with glistening frogs' eggs, trying to gather them like beads into necklaces, though they slipped through her fingers back into the clear water. So she knows she just leaves this tree alone, right? But when she goes to a stream, she likes to play with little frogs and frog eggs in the water. Her heart was filled with the beauty of her native Kenya when she left to attend a college run by Benedictine nuns in America, far, far from her home. So she moved to America for college. There she studied biology, the science of living things. It was an inspiring time for Wangari. The students in America in those years dreamed of making the world better. The nuns, too, taught Wangari to think not just of herself, but of the world beyond herself. The nuns, too, taught Wangari to think not just of herself, but of the world beyond herself. Very important lesson. How eagerly she returned to Kenya, how full of hope and of all that she had learned. So there she is learning from the nuns. So she's learning it's not just about me. I'm really here learning so that I can really make the world better. Here's the rest of her college. She had been away for 5 years, only 5 years, but they might have been 20, so changed was the landscape of Kenya. Wangari found the fig tree cut down, the little stream dried up, and no trace of frogs, tadpoles, or the silvery beads of eggs. Where once there had been little farms growing what each family needed to live on, and large plantations growing tea for export, now almost all the farms were growing crops to sell. Wangari noticed that the people no longer grew what they ate, but bought food from stores. The store food was expensive, and the little they could afford was not as good for them as what they had grown themselves. So that children, even grown ups, were weaker and often sickly. So this was her fig tree, if you remember, and it's cut down. And these people are just farming, but they're not farming for their family. They're just farming to sell it. And then they're buying store food, which isn't good. It's not like natural food, and it's making people sick. She saw that where once there had been richly wooded hills with grazing cows and goats, now the land was almost treeless, the woods gone. So many trees had been cut down to clear the way for more farms that women and children had to walk farther and farther in search of firewood to heat a pot or warm the house. Sometimes they walked for hours before they found a tree or bush to cut down. There were fewer and fewer trees with each one they cut, and much of the land was as bare as a desert. So there are just these fields, there's not enough trees. So they're trying to collect firewood, but it's like they have to go really, really far from their house. And you can see here too, it's starting to look like a desert, and there's just no more trees. Here we can see too, it used to be so green, right? In the beginning of the book. And now what color do we see? And I'm also seeing these lines here in the picture. And the small tree that lost many of its leaves is kind of bending. So these lines in the picture kind of show me something that's happening in the weather. When a tree is bending like that, I wonder if you can think about what makes a tree bend like this. Is it rain? Is it snow? Maybe wind? Without trees, there were no roots to hold the soil in place. Without trees, there was no shade, so it's even really hot. The rich topsoil dried to dust, and the devil wind blew it away. Rain washed the loose earth into the once clear streams and rivers, dirtying them with silt. So now the water is not clean. We have no clean drinking water, the women of the countryside complained. No firewood to cook with. Our goats and cows have nothing to graze on, so they make little milk. Our children are hungry, and we are poorer than before. Wangari saw that the people who had once honored fig trees and now cut them down had forgotten to take care for the land that fed them. So they had forgotten to care for the land that fed them. Now, the land, weak and suffering, could no longer take care of the people, and their lives became harder than ever. So people are not caring for the land, so the land cannot care for the people. The women blamed others. They blamed the government, but Wangari was not one to complain. She wanted to do something. Think of what we ourselves are doing, she urged the women. We are cutting down the trees of Kenya, which is deforestation, right? When we see that we are part of the problem, she said, we can become part of the solution. Wow, that's such a powerful sentence. Let me read it again. When we see that we are part of the problem, she said, we can become part of the solution. She had a simple and big idea. So she sees you can't just point at other people, right? It's not just other people that are the problem. She's like, no, actually, we're cutting down trees too. But if we know that we are the problem, we can make ourselves better and find the solution. So there she is. When we realize we're part of the problem, we can be part of the solution. There she is talking to people. And here she's teaching them. Looks like she's getting something from the tree. And I see even the children are learning with their moms too. Why not plant trees? She asked the women. She showed them how to collect tree seeds from the trees that remained. So that's what they're doing here. They're getting tree seeds. She taught them to prepare the soil, mixing it with manure. She showed them how to wet that soil, press a hole in it with a stick, and carefully insert a seed. Most of all, she taught them to tend the growing seedlings as if they were babies, watering them twice a day to make sure they grew strong. So she was teaching the women all these things, getting the seeds from the trees, planting them, and making sure you care for them like they're babies. I wonder why she used that language, as if they were babies. This is interesting though. So here they're not planting, but they have a big hole and they're carrying buckets on their head. That takes so much balance. It wasn't easy. Water was always hard to come by. Often the women had to dig a deep hole by the hand and climb into it to haul heavy bucketfuls of water up over their heads and back out of the hole. An early nursery in Wangari's backyard failed. Almost all the seedlings died, but Wangari was not one to give up, and she showed others how not to give up. So here it's really hard to get water, like they don't just have a sink or something, so they have to dig really deep and then take turns getting the water from the ground. And she showed others how not to give up. Many of the women could not read or write. They were mothers and farmers, and no one took them seriously. So people are like, what? You can't even read. Like, how are you going to do this stuff? But they did not need schooling to plant trees. They did not have to wait for the government to help them. They could begin to change their own lives. So I'm seeing here, even though these people can't read or write, they're still working really hard together and they're starting to have a really beautiful garden. So they're changing their own lives. They're making good choices. All this was heavy work, but the women felt proud. Slowly, all around them, they could begin to see the fruit of their work, of their hands. The woods were growing up again. Now, when they cut down a tree, they planted two in its place. When they cut down a tree, they planted two in its place. Their families were healthier, eating from the fruit trees they had planted and from the vegetable plots filled again with the yams, cassava, pigeon peas, and sorghum that grew so well. They had work to do, and the work brought them together as one, like the trees growing together on the newly wooded hills. The men saw what their wives, mothers, and daughters were doing and admired them, and even joined in. So before it used to be just the women, right? But now the men and the children too. So they grow the baby trees here. And when the trees get a little bit stronger, they'll go on the mountainside. And then they're putting the seedlings, or like the baby trees, so that they can grow the forest back. She gave seedlings to inmates of prisons and even to soldiers. You hold your gun. she told soldiers. But what are you protecting? The whole country is disappearing with the wind and water. You should hold the gun in your right hand and a tree seedling in your left. That's when you become a good soldier. So there she's talking to them. She's like, what are you going to protect if we don't even have trees, right? If we don't even have food to eat, we don't have fresh fruit, we don't have forests. So you should protect people and be planting trees. And these are the little baby trees, the seedlings that she gives to people. And so, in the 30 years since Wangari began her movement, tree by tree, person by person, 30 million trees have been planted in Kenya, and the planting has not stopped. So, all these people in line have a little tree, or they have tools that are going to help them plant these little trees. Some people have water. So they planted 30 million trees, and now there's more. And I can see also that now the land's getting more green. When the soil is exposed, Wangari tells us, it is crying out for help. It is naked and needs to be clothed in its dress. That is the nature of the land. It needs color. It needs its cloth of green. And I can see Wangari's there watching the people plant even more trees, and now there's a forest back there. So that goes back to what she was saying when she was little. She was like, the land is almost like a person, right? And the cloth or its dress is green. And before we could see that it was just turning brown, it was just dirt, almost like a desert. But her and the people she works with are making it green again. Green and beautiful. Author's note. So this is always at the end of a book, the note, when you have a nonfiction book. And this is telling you even more information in a different way that was in the book. The end. So I wonder, she was saying, when you know you're part of the problem, you can become part of the solution. So think about that, and that's something that you are going to answer as you go to the Google form for your work today.